Good morning.
Good morning.
So this will become session 5 of our conversations with my dad.
Welcome to session 5.
For those who aren't familiar, my name is Brian Anderson, and the gentleman sitting in front of you is G. Charles / Chuck Anderson. And we've been having some conversations about life, the universe, mythogenics, and all sorts of things. So we appreciate you being along on this journey with us. And today we're going to dig in just a little bit deeper to some of the meat of the way of wonder that we had talked about in previous episodes. And how would you like to kick that off?
Well, last time we got together, you mentioned the egg, the story of the egg.
Yes,
Maybe you ought to start with that.
we could do that. So for those that are just tuning in or didn't hear the last episode, we had talked a little bit about a short story called The Egg by a gentleman named Andy Weir. And we'll take a moment and just read that out loud so that you can become familiar with it. And we'll post a link to a version down in the notes below the video once this is done. But this is The Egg by Andy Weir. You were on your way home when you died. It was a car accident. Nothing particularly remarkable, but fatal nonetheless. You left behind a wife and 2 children. It was a painless death. The EMTs tried their best to save you, but to no avail. Your body was so utterly shattered, you were better off. Trust me. And that's when you met me. But what happened, you asked? Where am I? You died, I said matter-of-factly. No point in mincing words. There was a truck, and it was skidding. Yup, I said. I died? Yup, but don't feel bad about it. Everyone does, I said. You looked around. There was nothingness, just you and me. What is this place, you asked? Is this the afterlife? More or less, I said. Are you God, you asked? Yup, I replied. I'm God. My kids? My wife, you said? What about them? Will they be all right? That's what I like to see, I said. You just died and your main concern is for your family. That's good stuff right there. You looked at me with fascination. To you, I didn't look like God. I just looked like some man, or possibly a woman. Some vague authority figure, maybe. More of a grammar school teacher than the Almighty. Don't worry, I said. They'll be fine. Your kids will remember you as perfect in every way. They didn't have time to grow contempt for you. Your wife will cry on the outside, but she will be secretly relieved. To be fair, your marriage was falling apart. If it's any consolation, she'll feel very guilty for feeling so relieved. Oh, you said. So what happens now? Do I go to heaven or hell or something? Neither, I said. You'll be reincarnated. Ah, you said. So the Hindus were right. All religions are right in their own way, I said. Walk with me. He followed along as we strode through the void. Where are we going? Nowhere in particular, I said. It's just nice to walk while we talk. So what's the point then, you asked? When I get reborn, I'll just be a blank slate, right? A baby? So all my experiences and everything I did in this life won't matter. Not so, I said. You have within you all the knowledge and experiences of all your past lives. You just don't remember them right now. I stopped walking and took you by the shoulders. Your soul is more magnificent, beautiful, and gigantic than you can possibly imagine. A human mind can only contain a tiny fraction of what you are. It's like sticking your finger in a glass of water to see if it's hot or cold. You put a tiny part of yourself into the vessel, and when you bring it back out, you've gained all the experiences it had. You've been in a human for the last 48 years, so you haven't stretched out yet and felt the rest of your immense consciousness. If we hung out here for long enough, you'd start remembering everything. But there's no point of doing that between each life. How many times have I been reincarnated then? Oh, lots. Lots and lots. As in lots of different lives. I said, this time around, you'll be a Chinese peasant girl in 540 AD. Wait, what? You stammered. You're sending me back in time? Well, I guess technically. Time, as you know it, only exists in your universe. Things are different where I come from. Where you come from, you said. Oh, sure, I explained. I come from somewhere else. And there are others like me. I know you'll want to know what it's like here, but honestly, you wouldn't understand. Oh, you said, a little let down. But wait, if I get reincarnated to other places in time, I could have interacted with myself at some point. Sure, happens all the time. And with both lives only aware of their own lifespan, you don't even know what's happening. So what's the point of it all? Seriously, I asked. Seriously? You're asking me for the meaning of life? Isn't that a little stereotypical? Well, it's a reasonable question, you persisted. I looked you in the eye. The meaning of life, the reason I made this whole universe, is for you to mature. You mean mankind? You want us to mature? No, just you. I made this whole universe for you. With each new life, you grow and mature and become a larger and greater intellect. Just me. What about everyone else? There is no one else, I said. In this universe, there's just you and me. You stared blankly at me. But all the people on Earth, all you, different incarnations of you. Wait, I'm everyone? Now you're getting it, I said with a congratulatory slap on the back. I'm every human being who ever lived or will ever live, yes. I'm Abraham Lincoln and you're John Wilkes Booth, too, I added. I'm Hitler, you said, appalled. And you're the millions he killed. I'm Jesus, and you're everyone who followed him. You fell silent. Every time you victimized someone, I said, you were victimizing yourself. Every act of kindness you've done to yourself. Every happy and sad moment ever experienced by any human was, or will be, experienced by you. You thought for a long time. Why? You asked me. Why do all this? Because someday you will become like me. Because that's what you are. You're one of my kind. You're my child. Whoa, you said, incredulous. You mean I'm a god? No, not yet. You're a fetus. You're still growing. Once you've lived every human life throughout all time, you will have grown enough to be born. So the whole universe, you said, it's just an egg, I answered. Now it's time for you to move on to your next life. And I sent you on your way. That is The Egg by Andy Weir. So why do you feel like we needed to start there today?
Well, we don't think about a lot of the things that the egg brings up. You know, the idea that who am I? And, you know, in a dream, interestingly enough, we're all the characters in a dream. So it's almost like life is a dream. That we're God, we're each of the peaceful in the dream. Our self is a construction that we have out of all of that. That says hello to life, hello to the world, hello to myself and others. This is the concepts and tools of mythogenics to sort the story out for ourselves. It's really the central story. We talk about, well, we have talked about in our casual conversations in the previous about the way of wonder.
Yes.
Now, the ultimate way of wonder is what happens when we die. But then when you're in that state, the ultimate way of wonder is what happens when the next life, or what life happens. What are we encountering? Does each succeeding experience prepare us for the next? Or do we just accumulate experience and go nowhere with it? And that's one of the questions of mythogenics is, who am I? Where do I come from? Where am I going? And ultimately, the chances of our being here, according to Google, which is the most reasonable authority I can think of to ask, says that our chances of being, our odds of being here are 1 in 10 to the 2,685,000th power, or virtually zero. That's 10 with 2,685,000 zeros. That's a lot of zeros.
That's a lot of zeros. And yet, here we
Here
are.
we are. And there are billions of us, but how many of us are us in that 7 billion? The story asks, provocative questions. Do I harm myself when I harm others? And there's always, that's the essential spirituality of the world and all religions is do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Because ultimately we're doing unto ourselves.
Sure.
So it makes sense to be kind to one another. That's a hard lesson for people to learn. And so that's what the mythogenic lesson is about, is how do I deal with life, with that complexity and that immensity? And how do I deal with myself in the face of all the pain and difficulty and complications that we're going to encounter? How do I deal with others? And then the idea of the world. The world is really just an amalgam of the expressions and thoughts of people. It doesn't really exist. We all think it does, but it's the story we tell ourselves. And so these stories, like the egg, they may be true, they may be real, they may be so. That's our question: is what do we make of it as the story of our lives unfold? So I think that's where the story takes us, is to the threshold of this question of do I matter? Which may be the essential question of being human. Is 1 in 10 to the 2,685th power. Do I have a unique identity, or is that somehow, that's an awful lot of creativity for the universe representing this. So what the gift that we're given is so immense and so important, and we take it for such advantage. So one of the things we're working on is acceptance, gratitude, trust, and surrender to that story. Now that may be at odds with a person's religion, because each religion has its own way of telling us the same story. Many people are in the process of judging other people's story. And the way people look at it is, what I believe is the truth, what you believe is a myth.
Which is fraught with so many problems if you really take a look at that way of thinking with any type of an analytical or objective viewpoint. That what makes you the expert? Now,
My truth makes me the expert.
well, and I think we see a lot of this unfolding in the world right now, is that there are certain things that expertise does exist. There are people who have invested untold hours and efforts to become experts in their field of study and genuinely know what the hell they're talking about. I would consider you to be one of them. And there are others that have an emotional truth that they just believe without having done that type of diligence. And yet they maintain that they're on equal footing. So how can those two get resolved? Is there a path forward through mythogenics and the way of wonder to better understand that?
Well, as we begin to understand the way of wonder, but you can't grasp the way of wonder, interestingly enough, until you dealt with the issue of I matter. I matter to the universe so much. See that 1 in 10 to the 2,685,000 power is a testimonial to how significant I truly am. But when people are asked time after time and time again, do they matter? They don't really believe it. See, the fact that we're here is not evidence enough to believe it. And so we're very hard-hearted and very small in the belief that we have. So the egg is inviting us to consider how large our soul is. It's bigger than we think. It's different than we can imagine. It's elusive for everybody what the soul might consist of. And that's why we wrote the book Soul Solitude, just taking time for our soul to catch up with where we are at any given moment in our journey. So now is the time, in my estimation, to ask ourselves these questions.
And what answers do you arrive at by asking those questions in soul solitude?
You matter.
You matter. That's a difficult concept.
Apparently so. I'm working on it.
You know, because and I think I start to suspect why you felt that reading through the egg was an important thing. You know, one of the points that it brings up is that, you know, we are all connected. It suggests that there's no difference between you or I. We are one person. And that is a form of spirituality, I think, that has been, you know, emerging and growing. And I think more people are buying into that. However, a lot still reject that premise entirely and believe in the uniqueness of their own spirit and soul and individuality. So how can the two come to become reconciled?
Well, interestingly, the theoretical base of it is already established in physics. It's the idea of entanglement. We're not the same, but we are entangled. That we can't exactly separate ourselves from those that we're entangled with. The same is true on a biological level. We're a superorganism. We're not just the cells of our body, but, you know, a very large percentage of us is the accompanying organisms that populate our system. We are a superorganism, but we don't know how to separate that out. But, you know, one of the questions is, how much of who I am I? You know, and dealing with gut bacteria, for instance, there's been studies that demonstrate that we are part of a collective in our own self. And so the complexity of this is what troubles people, and they don't spend very much time thinking about it, exploring it, just too much to deal with. So when we, an interesting part of that is when we take a penicillin shot, for instance, we want to kill pathogens, but it also kills a lot of innocent bacteria and flora in the system that are part of us. So something of us dies off every time we're made whole. It's a very complex interaction. doesn't work the way we think it does, which becomes a meme with genetic explorations that says that the world doesn't work the way we think it does. And so one of the things that we're discovering is trying to catalog memes. We've got down to about 13, which we don't want to go all through all at once. But certainly the world doesn't work the way we think it does. And life is painful, difficult, and complicated are two memes that we work with all the time.
And just to give people a framework and a 10,000 foot view of what we're talking about, we're going to go ahead and share the mythogenic concordance and spiritual synergetics overview map, which is really a mind map that you've created that creates a structure for putting all of these different frameworks together and illustrating how they interrelate and interoperate with one another. So as these conversations continue, we will drill deeper down into some of those individual frameworks, but we'll just start with the bigger box. And you've got life and self, the world and others at four corners with a vertically aligned diamond containing four squares and a circle in the middle. Can you kind of walk us through what that is, and then what the images that are outside of the box intimate at?
Okay, well, we obviously start with the four corners: life, the world, self, and others. Those are the things that are knit our existence on this planet. Is, what is my relationship with life? Some people characterize their life in economic terms. Some characterize their life in spiritual terms. Some characterize their life in mental activity, different ways of doing it. One of the things that we talk about are the arenas of life. And one of the thinking in terms of vocation is a big one for people. Relationships, big one for people. And being creative and being intellectual are different dimensions to that box. But we're, it's a lot of material to go through all at once.
And obviously, I mean,
see, all of it's a lot of material, and this is like a great big sandwich. We're looking at the middle part of the sandwich. We're looking at the bread, the top and the bottom of it.
Sure. Well, and we don't want to overwhelm everyone, so we're not going to, try to eat the elephant all at one time.
Right. One spoon at a time.
We're going to chunk it down into more manageable chunks and cover those. And so just to set expectations for this, I think that there's going to be somewhat of a bifurcation in the content that we're going to be creating here going forward, where this project of just having these conversations will continue. But we'll also try to put together a more instructional,
systematic
presentation of each of the components of this. But just wanted to make that introduction real quick. So we'll go ahead and stop sharing that meme at this point and walk me through how this way of wonder, concept really kind of started. You had mentioned before you were really engaged with Joseph Campbell and the kind of content that he was putting forward. And then what happened from there?
Well, I basically went through a life-changing experience with my health. It was discovered that I had major heart disease, and I hadn't known it. I was 45 years old at the time when I discovered that it was a miracle I was alive.
And why is that? Well, what was the heart disease and what was the ramifications of it?
Well, the heart disease is, I had a blockage on my right side, 100% blockage on my left coronary artery, which fortunately worked reverse. But what made it interesting was that I had what's called collateral circulation. So all these tiny blood vessels took over the job of the big arteries, and I got sufficient blood to my heart unless I was overdoing it. So there's exercise is very difficult for me because of I only get a limited amount of blood, and when it reaches its limit, so do I. But that was then the additional thing was I had 2 aneurysms, which are swellings in the arteries. So in my aorta, I have 2 aneurysms that we have to keep. And if they couldn't do any angioplasty on my heart, but the arteries were because of the aneurysms. The chances are that would create a situation where they rupture. So I am where I am.
Which you shouldn't be, from all we know about the way things are supposed to work.
See, that's one of the things about the way Wonder unfolded is you don't always know you're experiencing the way Wonder until something happens that, and our experience has to be looked at. Now, a lot of times, people feel like, well, let's just get on with it. But one of the things that everything we experience, another meaning is life has purpose and meaning. Everything we experience is for us. It's the gift that we're given in our creation. Our 10 million, our 10th, 2,684,000 power is an enormous gift. And what we experience, we ought to take a look at and say, why? Why not? But what we often do is go beyond it. If we're not aware that we actually experience the way of wonder, it's difficult to be grateful for it. And that's why being moderately reflective, taking time for our souls to catch up, is one of the things that allows us to look at what exactly is going on in my life.
Well, and putting that into context, you have another 4-point framework, another meme that you use for interpreting these things, starting with acceptance and including gratitude. You and I have talked about it. So, in terms of this health diagnosis, where you have 100% blockage on one side of your heart, 70% on the other, by most counts, you should have already been down and out. And leading into soul solitude, I from our conversations, it sounds like your framework of acceptance, gratitude, trust, and surrender really was that jumping off point into this entire experience. Accepting that this health condition was there and there wasn't any provident way to fix it. Gratitude for what was the gratitude?
Well, that's the hard part. How do you be grateful for something you don't really want? And that's where the spiritual growth comes into, is because one of the things that was more true about me before that was I wasn't into my feelings, my heart. It's all head.
I can confirm that.
And so,
you did anger really well.
yeah, but the heart was not open. In the chakra systems, that's one of the things about opening the heart chakra, allows us to experience things differently. And then in that experience, I had this realization, not a vision, but a realization, like a vision of this poem of the advance of potential and nothing.
I'm sorry, what was it again?
The
Please.
dance of potential and nothing.
The dance of potential and nothing. Okay.
And we'll share that one of the times. Nothing we need to share today. But out of all of that reflection and stuff came this inkling. I was in church and I was looking at a crucifix, and it looked to me like the message of futility that Jesus is giving us that says, you matter. You matter enough, I'm willing to prove. Because what happens with Catholics is he says, this is my body, and we go into a holy meltdown and don't get the idea, which is the next part of it, is given for you. You matter. And if I don't get that message, I miss the entire business. And the egg is a nice way, another way of saying, you matter. And this is the point that we need to reflect on as we go through our life, dealing with ourselves, dealing with others, dealing with the world. We matter in the world. We matter in life. We matter to other people. And other people matter to us. We have a tendency to become impatient and write things off and write people off. But a full life, in a mythogenic sense, well-constructed life, writes no one. It just, we try to find ways and means to incorporate the contributions of others into our own way of being and thinking and our own self. Because we're entangled with them, whether we know it or not. We're entangled with them.
And again, we're back to entanglement. So, you know that I spend a lot of time looking into entanglements and researching it and reading up on it. And you've spent quite a bit of time in the same area. And we've had some interesting conversations about the physics side of all this and breaking down quantum mechanics down to a more fundamental level. You've got your various types of quarks, you've got your leptons and everything else. But there's a particular particle that you've kind of latched onto as a representation of the fundamental proof of this entire framework. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Well, it's a two-part particle. The first one is the quark, that there are no naked quarks in the universe. Quarks always are bonded with the other quark.
Right.
They don't come alone. And one of the things that holds the quarks together is a particle called the gluon.
So what does the gluon do?
Holds them together. And this is basically the particle that breaks down and creates a nuclear reaction if it's unbound.
How powerful would that nuclear reaction be if a gluon was unbound? What is the theorized and modeled consequence of snapping that bond?
E equals mc squared. That's the whole deal.
Right. So theoretically, the entire universe would unravel if two gluons became unentangled.
Yeah, if the gluons went on strike, goodbye.
Right. I mean, theoretically, you could take two gluons and stretch them across the entire expanse of the universe, and they would come back together. You couldn't break that bond, regardless of how much time and space you introduce between the two.
Well, this is a theoretical matter. That
Sure.
It's under quantum chromodynamics, is what they call it. And if it's too shaken up, it does one of three things. It either blows up, either returns to its original shape, or it creates something new.
And how would it know to do that?
That's the great mystery. doesn't have a brain. It doesn't have it's just the nature of what it is.
And we encounter that a lot. I mean, you know, look at the world around us at this moment in time, dealing with this SARS-CoV-19 pandemic. You know, the virus is not alive, technically, yet it still manages to reproduce and has an intention, and it's out there fulfilling its design and purpose, which is to reproduce and, you know, propagate itself. You know, which is the nature of viruses. You know, we see this in the business world and cybercrime and, you know, those viruses. You know, they are exploitive of whatever environment that they come into, and never produce positive results for the system, only for themselves. You know, it's a parasitic.
Well, that's what is interesting about a meme. Is a meme is a kind of a conceptual virus. It can be spread from person to person.
Sure, it's a hack.
Its own life.
Right.
Not alive, but
it takes on a life of its own. It mimics life, which brings us back to the, you know, question of, you know, does art imitate life? Is life imitating art? You know, does mythogenics have an answer to that?
yes. Because myth, art, poetry, and music form a nexus of concepts that add salt, that add the flavor to life.
Uh-huh.
So, you know, if you want salt and pepper, you know, pass the art, pass the myth, pass the poetry, pass the music. You know, you're going to get the seasons. They aren't life themselves, but they make life far more interesting.
Sure.
You know, one of the things is that, like the glue on the cork, we're using in this metaphor, it's poetry in quantum physics. Now, physicists may not appreciate poetry so much. But a mythician like myself does.
A mythician.
Mythician.
Interesting.
Well, it's beyond mythology. Mythology is the study of myth. A mythician is one who uses the myth to try to heal pain, difficulty, and complexity.
Which, I mean, sounds kind of like a trifecta between a storyteller, a musician, and a magician. Even though all three of them are kind of the same, you know, they're just different expressions, I think, of that root concept. So what are some examples that somebody else can relate back to as far as you would concern, or I guess how you would categorize other mythicians that you've encountered in life? Like, a couple of things spring to my mind, like possibly J.R.R. Tolkien and the Lord of the Rings. You know, obviously he created a wonderful pantheon of existence and world building, you know, myth to support that story and bring that storyline and all those characters. And would you agree that that's an example of mythician? Or
Well, it's in a technical sense, he's a mythician, but he's not creating myths. Because see, the idea of myth is it's out of the collective unconscious, and nobody knows who made the story. The idea that Tolkien can create this world, a mythic world, but it isn't, in terms of the way mythologists characterize myth, it's different. The same thing with Harry Potter, other relevant stories. Oscar Wilde has some stories that are mythic, but they're not technically myth.
Well, you know, and
They're mythific.
what I find interesting about many of those myths that, you know, we all have an opportunity to share and interact with, and, you know, a lot of people latch onto it, you know, others don't. But really at the core of that entire mythic trope is still that core essence of you matter. There's every character that's in there all play a part in getting to whatever that final moment is. And, you know, in the case of Frodo, you know, he wasn't the action star, he wasn't the general, he wasn't anything, but he suffered to get the ring.
Because he had a burden. It's called a mythic burden.
Right.
Yeah.
And you have this you matter focal effectiveness array. So this will be the only other slide I think that we'll share today here. But if you want to address that briefly.
Which one is that?
The you matter focal effectiveness array.
That's more about leadership than anything else, because this is not just knowledge that is conceptual and not related to the real world.
Right.
So,
And we see this at the top of the pyramid as you have it, you've got leadership dynamics, but you know, as with Maslow's hierarchy of needs and other things, it needs to be built from a strong foundation. So let's just quickly, I don't want to spend too much time, but talk to me about how you built this pyramid and, you know, how these different components kind of build upon one another.
they reveal themselves. You know, it's not exactly a conscious thing, but it's a creation of understanding that comes. Like putting ethics in there. A lot of people's leadership model doesn't include ethics.
Right.
And negotiation is really a fundamental way of dealing with the life and the world. We have to negotiate with ourselves sometimes.
Sure. You know, and you have optimal empathy, which is an interesting concept. Optimal empathy, rather than pure empathy, unrestrained empathy.
Well, empathy, we can be used against it. You know, empathy, optimal empathy is no when to use it. And as we discussed, there's times where you try to draw somebody else out of the pit that they're in, and they wind up dragging you
in. Which, for all 41 years of my existence so far, has been one of the most repugnant and true things that I think I've heard. You know, I mean, I spent what 3-4 years of my life grounded in my teenage years because I refused to acknowledge that that was true. My empathy was so unrestrained that I would sacrifice my own well-being for others. That's definitely not optimal.
Right.
You know, and I resisted this concept for years that you can't pull somebody out of the hole that they're in. They can only drag you into it.
Yeah.
And yet, time and painful life experience again and again.
See,
you keep coming up to it. You know?
Empathy is one of the things that takes us into helping other people see that they matter. You matter enough to help them see that they matter. You know, and this is such an important way of being in the world because we're not here by ourselves. And the deal is to seek to matter to ourselves, to sow to other people that they matter, and to serve. You know, it's not good enough to just say it. You've got to act on it.
You know, and that's a hard thing to see. You know, and I think we'll delve into this at another time because I want to kind of keep this moving. And I'm going to stop sharing this particular image at the moment. but we get beat up in life.
Amen.
The entire system is telling us that we don't matter, that we're replaceable, that we're fleeting and not valued. And after being inundated with that messaging, whether it be from, employers or, governmental controls or, whatever those outside forces are that don't look at us, don't see us. I know a number of people who have, immune disorders that aren't always physically apparent. And, they're subject to judgment on the part of others who don't see a physical disability and choose to comment, on whatever their perceived actions are. Oh, you can't be disabled because I don't see you in a wheelchair, whatever that is. But the person who's going through it often feels beat up, abused, worthless. I've been there. Probably largely due to a lack of optimal empathy. And you've got a beautiful story that you've put together, and you actually composed an arrangement around it. I think really that pays tribute to this concept. Do you want to introduce us to that?
I'm happy to. It's originally from a poem by Myra Brooks Welsh called "The Touch of the Master's Hand." But I took the basic idea and translated it into music and my own lyrics.
Right, which you've done often, growing up. My first real experience of this is you put Humpty Dumpty in music. Most people know Humpty Dumpty.
Right.
He sat on a wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. But you put it to music, and every time I've ever sung it to somebody, they're like, it's almost as though they already know it.
Right. Humpty Dumpty sat. Oh, I can't
Humpty
remember.
Dumpty sat on a
Oh.
wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall.
All the king's horses and all the king's men.
They could have put Humpty together again. Poor Humpty Dumpty, poor Humpty Dumpty. All the king's horses and all the king's men. They could have put Humpty together again. Yeah, it's an interesting way that you do that, and how it aligns to people. And so, although this may seem a little bit pre-concocted, as you and I were discussing putting together this particular session, I had requested that you perform the Old Violin for people. And so based off of this poem, The Touch of the Master's Hand, would you mind sharing with us the Old Violin?
I'm happy to share it. The idea here is that we forget that we matter. It's easy to forget. If you ever have it, if you never got the insight, you don't forget. But if you get it, it's easy to forget. So this is for memory purposes for those who find things are easier when they remember, when they sing them. It goes like this. What am I bid for this old violin? Cried the auctioneer to the throng. It's battered and worn, I realize, but you can have it for a song. $1, who'll make it two? $2, who'll make it three? $3 once, $3 twice. It's going fast, crying. From the back of the room stepped a gray-haired man, unknown to those around, and asked to hear that violin play and judge it by its sound. Surprised at such a simple request, and not knowing what to say, the auctioneer surrendered it, and the stranger began to play. The song he played so skillfully brought tears to all our eyes, and as we heard those strings and felt life's pains and began to realize that our lives too were so much like that precious old violin, laying out a tune and out of touch with the song we hold within. But the day will come when the music from our chaos and our pain, and then our soul will be made whole again. Well, the music ceased and yet lived on, and the auctioneer called again. What am I bid now, my friend, for this splendid violin? $1,000 who'll make it two, 2,000 who'll make it three, 3,000 once, 3,000 twice. It's going gone crying. How many lives I've wondered since are beaten and just gave in to be auctioned cheap to some thoughtless crowd like that wonderful violin. Surprised at such a moment that comes along, and we'll never quite understand the value of the change that's wrought by the touch of the master's hand. The value of the change that's wrought by the touch of the master's hand.
Thank you. That was beautiful.
Thank
And I think it encapsulates so much of the framework that we've been talking about for the way of wonder. It's got it all. There's life is nothing but pain, difficulty, complication. There's the you matter mean. There's the shame, blame, judge, justify mean. There's the acceptance, gratitude, trust, and surrender mean. Really, when you start thinking about it in terms of this greater framework of mythogenics, you can start to see these components built in and where they really speak to us and draw us forward. And I don't know that we have time to get into that today, but I think maybe our next conversation we should start talking a little bit about the difference when interfacing with the way of wonder between driven reality and drawn reality. Would you agree that that would be the next logical conversation?
And I do. And we should really start with or talk about the inspiration that came originally to create the whole system.
All right.
The dance of the nothing in potential.
That sounds like a wonderful place. And I think we'll just pause the conversation here until next time so that people can go back and listen to that and gain from it what they want.
Okay.
Would you be willing to share this sheet music as well?
Oh, sure.
We'll put a link to that too.
Okay.
All right, wonderful. Well, thank you for your time.
Okay. You're welcome. Thank you.
Good chat.
Okay.